would like to go ahead and introduce Marla Matkin. Marla Matkin is an experienced first-person historian. She has written and performed many top-level first-person portrayals, particularly of women in history of all kinds, of all stripes, from the highest society ladies to some of the more destitute people, women throughout history. She is a fine actress. She's a teacher, a former teacher, an educator, and she's also all of our friend. And we're privileged to once again enjoy her artistry. This is Miss Marla Matkin.
Yeah.
The moment I saw the brilliant, proud morning sunshine high over the deserts of Santa Fe, something stood still in my soul. D.H. Lawrence. The Santa Fe Trail began with William Becknell's expedition of 1821 and would be active until the coming of the railroad in 1880, when it was no longer necessary to travel by wagon. In 1829, we had the first record of a woman on the Santa Fe Trail. In fact, it was 6 women and 10 men who'd been exiled by the government of Mexico in retaliation to Spain. And they would join an American caravan headed up the trail. But they disappeared nameless into history, except for one man who reappeared later and joined the Army of the West to the southwest, where he was the newly appointed American consul. Now, the goal of this presentation is to familiarize you not only with the women of the trail, but how it was for them to travel and live alongside the trail. And it should be very much emphasized, women were not, and I repeat, were not silent bystanders on the trail. They were vocal and very active participants on the trail, and you will meet some of those women tonight, because scattered throughout this presentation are 3 short but informative and insightful first-person presentations of some of the more notable women along the trail. Now, I'm going to provide you a brief overview of the history and what it was like on the trail. Now, I know some of you know a great deal about Santa Fe Trail. Others maybe not as much, and you probably heard things about it today. But this is to put these women's lives and experiences into perspective. Now, the Santa Fe Trail was about a 1,200-mile trek, depending on where you departed from. In 1821, you were probably leaving from around Franklin, Missouri. By 1832, you very likely were waving goodbye from Independence, Missouri. And by 1845, your departure point was Kansas City. By this time, you've subtracted about 300 miles from your trip. Now, as many of you probably already know, the Santa Fe Trail was a trail of trade and commerce, primarily. It was also a military route and sometimes immigrant trade. Traders took to Santa Fe those things that they had no other way of getting, such as textiles and hardware. And in some cases, those traders would negotiate for silver, mules, and furs. Other traders chose to sell their wagons and livestock and make a speedy return trip. Now, of significance also that's sometimes overlooked on the trail, it was an important international trade route. It wasn't just within this country. And because of that, it was economically advantageous and very culturally diverse. And it was a highway over which stage lines ran as well. Now, most traders could make about 2 8-week trips to Santa Fe a year. And on a very good year, if the weather, among other things, cooperate, they might be able to squeeze in a third one, which was very appreciated to their bottom line. It was always thought advisable to travel in larger groups of wagons for protection, and some of these traders traveled with military contingents. So it was a safety factor, plus more hands make for lighter work. If you get in trouble, the more people you have available with possible expertise, the better off you are on the trail. Now, 2/3 of the trail ran through Kansas. So we have the largest portion of the Santa Fe Trail. The other states involved were Missouri, Oklahoma, Colorado, and of course, New Mexico. And a 63-mile span in the southwest part of the state was known as the Jornado, meaning long journey. It reached from the Arkansas River to Cimarron Springs. And there wasn't a water source on it anywhere, a water pool, a drop of water. There was not a tree or shrub. And it was considered the most horrendous and terrible part of the journey. You dreaded it. If you got through it, you felt like you'd accomplished something on the trail. Now, why was it necessary to have a military presence on the trail? Well, there were border disputes of the 1840s. There were disputes between the traders and Indians. There was the Mexican-American War of 1846-48, where the United States would claim possession of the Southwest. And then there was the Civil War. The trail was a culturally mosaic. We're talking a lot nowadays, particularly the last year and a half or two, about cultural diversity. There was nothing more diverse than the Santa Fe Trail. There was nothing more diverse. You could find anybody and everybody. Goal seekers, adventurers, mountain men, packers, traders, journalists, writers, translators, invalids. And of course you had that international aspect too. So it was very, very culturally diverse in the day. Now, I would like to introduce you to our First Lady of the evening, Susan Shelby Magoffin. Susan Shelby Magoffin was born into wealth and privilege. She was an unlikely person to be found on the Santa Fe Trail. But she would indeed be the first white woman to travel the Santa Fe Trail. And it is through her diary that we know most of what we know about the trail and trail travel. She began her diary in June of 1846 in Independence, Missouri, and she would write in it almost every day. She chronicled in great detail everything of custom or appearance that she saw and experienced. She traveled with her husband Samuel, her servant Jane, and her dog Ring. She was most at home when living in her tent, where she had a carpet, a bed, a mattress, table, and chairs. By the end of the trail, this woman, who was a complete novice, only 18, turned 19 on the trail, would be fluent in Spanish and, more importantly, in trader lingo. So I present to you Susan Shelby Magoffin. Now my prairie life begins. And with my dear husband Samuel, who I refer to as mi alma, my soul, I embark on this pioneering experience. My journey tells a story different than what has ever been done before. The curtain rises on a new scene, my personal trek, which spans from the city of New York to the plains of New Mexico. I can hardly wrap my mind around it as I ride down the trail. Upon entering this prairie world, we observe migrating buffalo. We sup on soup made of the hump ribs, the choicest meat of the buffalo. I have never tasted its like in the best hotels of Philadelphia or New York. Unfortunately, these animals are quite ugly, ill-shapen things with long shaggy hair over their heads. But they are the supreme rulers of their prairie kingdom. I share with you now a portion of my diary. On July 4th, 1846, I took the opportunity to cut my name among the hundreds of others on Pawnee Rock. It is near this very location we suffered a horrendous carriage accident. What a mess of baskets, boxes, and bags. But we picked up and traveled on, though both my husband and I were battered and bruised, to say the very least. At last, we arrived at Bent's Fort. The buildings in the fort are constructed of adobe with dirt floors, which we must dampen with water several times a day, and ceilings made of logs. Within the walls of this fort, we become part of a very interesting and diverse culture. It was during my stay at the fort that I suffered a miscarriage. And to think in a few short months I should have been a happy mother and made the heart of a father glad. In the room directly below me, an Indian woman gave birth to a healthy baby. Within 30 minutes, she went to the river and bathed herself and the child. It is a ritual of her people, I am told. But time and trail wait for no one. Our next destination, Las Vegas, New Mexico, where I was shocked to see children in a perfect state of nudity and women wearing skirts scantily clad, showing their calves, and low-cut blouses. All this aside, they are a very quick and intelligent people. Again, from my diary. We traveled in the wake of the Army under General Kearney. On August 31st, 1846, under the Star-Spangled Banner, I entered Santa Fe, the first American lady to enter under such circumstances, I was told. It was hard to realize that I was in my own house where I was to receive callers and set up housekeeping. The military had been very punctual in calling, some nearly every day. One even arrived with an invitation to a Spanish ball given by the officers to the traders. I felt it impolite not to exhibit myself at the menagerie, along with the other bipeds of curiosity. I observed Dona Tulas, principal Monte dealer of Santa Fe. I hope you too have an opportunity to catch a glance of her. Unable to see me in person, General Kearney sent his regards by the way of Mialma as we prepared to depart Santa Fe. I prefer to ride horseback if possible, and if the opportunity presents itself, I'd gladly tramp over the terrain and countryside, whether high-low, despite the dangers. Again, from my diary, I read. Wednesday, November 25th, 1846, is a most memorable day, as it is the anniversary of our wedding. It'll be fresh in the minds of those most concerned. I was relieved to have cause for celebration, as I have been ill with fever while at San Gabriel. After great prostration of body, I was again creeping about. December 29th, 1846, finds the enemy, the Mexican army, on us as we hear today, and they've even had battle with our troops only about 80 miles from us. It was quite a nice little skirmish. Later in January, rumors come to us that the population of New Mexico is rising up between us and Santa Fe. In truth, we are flying before them as we pass through the Coronado de Muerto. I deal with an ever-present fear for myself and Mialma. We take refuge in a boarding house, and the inmates there are exceedingly kind. We have chocolate at breakfast, again about 10, with dinner at 2, chocolate with supper at 9, and again at dark. I shall have to make me a recipe book to take home. The cooking here is entirely different from ours, but the meals are quite fine. 'Twould be a shame not to let my friends taste them too. We are given a nice diversion. The wonder of wonders that the American lion himself has called today, General Zachary Taylor, old rough and ready. He was very talkative, polite, quite agreeable, with a seemingly high regard for female character, as he should since he fathers 4 daughters. He even wore his uniform, which I am told is no common custom with him. The world is full of trials and woes God sends us all through, but we dare not complain even though they be hard. It is the life of a wandering princess, this one of mine, and I have accepted it as my lot. I have shared with you today a brief but telling account of our 1,200-mile trek. But do not be fooled by its brevity. For within the pages of my diary lies the mystery of mysteries, the Santa Fe Trail. Now, you may well wonder, if you have chosen to travel the trail, what your daily experiences are going to be. Well, you're going to wake up about dawn. The trail hands are going to go out, round up the stock, hitch up the wagons. You're going to load the wagons, then you're ready to mount up and ride. Now, some of you will be walking. You head out, and by midday you will be stopping. You will then hitch the animals, graze them, haul water, gather wood or buffalo chips for the cooking fire, and you will prepare and eat your main meal of the day. Now, Marion Sloan Russell, who you will meet a little later, was a little girl on the trail at 7, and her duty was to go out and gather buffalo chips. But she said you had to be very careful. Now, not because they were green, you could tell that pretty easily, but you better kick them because underneath might be spiders, centipedes, or often a scorpion. And then she would gather them up in her skirts and take them back to the cook fire. Now, what were your rations on the trail? Well, you had a pound of flour, a pound of sow belly bacon, 1 ounce coffee, 2 ounces sugar, and a dash of salt. Not exactly gourmet eating. And if you did get a treat, it was usually beans or maybe dried apples, or hopefully the men would go hunting. Now, during this stop, the men would also make any repairs on the wagons, doctor the horses, and then possibly if time allowed, they would hunt. And they then all moved out shortly after noon. Then you came to your evening stop, much the same, taking care of the horses, necessary repairs on wagons. I mean, this is your transportation. You better take care of it and those animals. And then you would choose the night guards for the night, and hopefully you'd have a few hours leisure or a good sleep. Now, again, Marion Sloan tells that she and her brother Will like to play in no man's land. Now, if you traveled with a military contingent, they circled up, and then the traders circled up. And then in between was no man's land. And she said they would go out and they'd play leapfrog, ball games, dare base. And then they also had a little game. They found that tarantulas lived in big holes in the ground. So her and her brother would go out and sniff around those holes going, tarantula, tarantula, come out, tell us what it's all about. And they'd do that, and pretty soon here these big, hairy, long-legged spiders would crawl out to entertain the kids. These are experiences that they couldn't get in any classroom. Now, if you decided to travel a trail, what might you encounter? That is, if you're brave enough. Well, actually, a good deal of time you were dealing with boredom and tedium. You weren't necessarily always going to be in constant peril. You could be, and you better be vigilant, but you weren't always going to be. What was really going to test your mettle was mosquitoes, gnats, and weather. And 200 years later, when we go on vacation, what tests our mettle? But mosquitoes, gnats, and the weather. There were other things that could, you could encounter Indians. sure enough. Weather, storms, extreme heat. We know what extreme heat is the last few days. But there would be disease, injury, accident. There would be fires, thievery, lack of food and water. Now Hollywood has kind of led us to believe, and this goes for any trail. I don't care if you're traveling the Santa Fe Trail, the Oregon Trail, the California Trail, the Mormon Trail, or you're in the frontier military. Your major source of death is not going to be the Indians. It's going to be disease, illness, and accident. What kind of illnesses are you going to encounter on the trail? Cholera. And few people ever walked away from cholera. You think COVID is bad. Few people ever walked away from cholera. There would be malaria. Now you did have quinine. Fever, dysentery, and influenza. And sometimes the only remedies you had were homemade remedies on the trail. Then there were accidents. What kind of accidents you have? Well, you wagon accidents. You have these big wagons, big animals. Especially if you were immigrants, some of you weren't very well experienced. And you just simply might not know what you're doing. But then after all, an accident's an accident. So then there are guns. Everybody had to have a gun on the trail for protection. But not everybody knew how to wisely use a gun. You know, you could prop it up against the wall, it'd fall over, you'd drop it somewhere, you'd shoot yourself or somebody else. And like I said, this happened in the frontier army too. Some of these greenhorn soldiers. And there was the old phrase, they just didn't know it was loaded. So, and then another very crucial form of death on the trail was river crossings. You're going to have to get all those wagons across some rivers, and you hope to find a narrow opening with a shallow bed. Not always easy. And numerous lives were lost in river crossings on the Santa Fe Trail, and other trails for that matter. So, now you get an idea of what you might encounter should you choose to travel the trail, and what these women encountered. Now, I would like to introduce you to our next lady of the evening, Dona Tulas. Fruit and young girls ripened early in the sultry valley of east central Sonora. Maria Gertrudis Rostello, the famous gambling queen of the 1830s and 40s, was born there in the around 1800. They don't have an exact birthday for her, as a matter of fact. And she made her fame and fortune under the name of Tulas. Some think because of her curvaceous figure, others, the word Tulas simply means slender reed. She had an uncanny perspective and power over the male psyche. That's how she made her money. And it came early in life, and it was probably just a native or astute power on her part. And she was very intelligent, and she made her money at the card game Monte. And she said the mysteries of Monte could only be learned by losing at it. And she was willing to show you how that could happen. She had to decide early in life between wealth and power or home and family. What do you think she chose? So, let's learn the tricks of the trade from the gambling queen herself, Dona Tulas. He's a fool who thinks by force or skill to turn the current, much less a woman's will. As a shrewd and independent businesswoman, I have amassed wealth and power, the envy of many. Some even regale me as a very fascinating woman. While I am flattered, I assure you my sizable acquisitions have been accumulated by my own labor and exertion. But I would be pleased, though, if you find yourself in Santa Fe, to welcome you to my home and business on Burrow Alley between Palace Avenue and San Francisco Street. I promise you, you won't be disappointed. The floors are covered with the finest European carpets of my choosing. Etched mirrors illuminate your surroundings. Crystal chandeliers, rich drapes, and imported furniture have been brought down the trail by wagon. I would also like to invite you to spend an evening as my guest in my saloon and gambling house. Why, you might even find yourself rubbing elbows with a governor, or possibly a priest. I guarantee it to be a festive atmosphere. Now, you may ask, by what design did I accumulate this wealth and power? It was a conventional start. After all, at the age of 23, I married the prominent Manuel Cisneros. Inspired to maintain my independence, I retained my diary, my personal property, and my maiden name. These, as you well know, are no small accomplishments. Unfortunately, our marriage was visited by sadness when 2 sons born to us died in infancy. I would not be discouraged and made up for this misfortune by adopting daughters, which I married off to Americans. It gradually helped me build bridges through these marriages with American traders. It is a fascinating perspective how you can deal often with the male psyche. Now, I make no apologies for the fact that I have an eye for the art of the deal. Not only have I succeeded in the gambling and saloon business, but when I became aware of money to be made and profits in the gold and mule business, I didn't hesitate. And I broadened my interest still further to include investments on the Chihuahua and Santa Fe trails. But I am probably best known as Madame Tulas, Queen of Sin. I rule my gambling kingdom as the skillful dealer Monty, named after the mountain of cards left behind after a certain amount had been dealt. Played with the traditional old Spanish deck of 40 cards, which I deal with skillful precision as they slip through my fingers as though I was handling a knitting needle. Some even claim I know the betting habits of each player, and that I have the ability to read the body language and facial expressions of my often sweaty and sometimes fidgety opponents. I always command the situation and maintain superiority over the game because I never reveal my secrets or my emotions. A brash Kentucky trader once taunted me after he left the table broke, at which point he danced a gypsy jig yelling, "Wake up, snakes, hail Columbia, and off to California morning." And I say to you, fancy lady, I'll see you in the fall. I did him one better. I curtsied and disappeared into the dawn. At the start of the Mexican-American War, American troops soon arrived. I welcomed them as friends and customers. My new friends, albeit Rangers in the U.S. Army, found themselves in need of money. Having been told I dealt in large sums of money, not to mention enemy secrets and information, my help and generosity was quickly sought. A gilt-edged invitation from one Lieutenant Colonel David Mitchell was delivered. At the appointed time, this most handsome officer stood at my door in full dress uniform, and I, in silk and fine jewels, was escorted on his arm to the play Pisario in the Palace of the Governors. After a delightful evening and the promise of a General Sloan, I was escorted to my door late that night. And, might I add, a good time such as the angels might smile down upon was exchanged between us. My loan to Mitchell enabled him to send forth into battle his elite Chihuahua Rangers. a war correspondent, he foolishly threatened to send an account of our evenings spent together to his St. Louis newspaper. But that was before Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell threatened to shoot him if he succeeded. Never underestimate a well-stated threat, or better yet, a loaded pistol. After the conflict, New Mexico would become a United States territory, and I would proudly become a United States citizen. Love, monty, and intrigue have ruled much of my life. But as I once read, everyone is as God made them, many a great deal worse. As for me, I woke up one morning and found myself famous. But oh, how martyrdom loves the folly of fame. Yes, it is a great experience. And as for me, I leave you with that thought by saying to you, adios, my friends. And we may meet again along the trail. I, for one, look forward to it. Now, unfortunately, there are a lot of fascinating women on the trail, and I can't regale you with each one, but I can give you a bit of information with the hope that if you're interested enough, you'll read more on yourself. First, we have Mary Donahoe. In 1832, Mary Donahoe, an intrepid and courageous woman, made use of her energy and commanding nature by accompanying her husband, William, to Santa Fe, where they operated the hotel on the plaza for 5 years before taking to the trail and returning home. Then we have Charlotte Green. She is another woman that you would have found at Ben's Fort. She was a woman of color. She, along with her husband Dick and her brother Andrew, were house slaves of the Bent brothers. She had an infectious laugh and was known up and down the Rocky Mountains for her good cooking and entertaining one and all with her singing and fandango dancing. Then we have Sister Blandina Segal. When she was transferred to Santa Fe, she helped co-found public and Catholic schools. She was also a diligent worker on behalf of the sick, the poor, as well as immigrants. And she was a powerful advocate for Hispanics and Indians who were losing their land to swindlers. Then we have Julia Archibald Holmes. In 1859, she accompanied her husband James to Santa Fe, where he would be the secretary of the territory. And she would be a correspondent for the New York Herald Tribune. In an effort to highlight the suffrage movement, she wrote and published an account of walking along the Santa Fe Trail, because she walked most of the trail, as well as an earlier climb of Pikes Peak in a bloomer outfit. Then we have Eliza St. Clair Sloan. She was an adventurous woman, and she always loved to travel new trails, a real nomad. Mother of Marion Sloan Russell, she was an innkeeper and cook. In fact, she cooked for 4 days. And she would instill in her children something they would have never gotten anywhere else: a wanderlust, courage, and sense of wonder. And last but not least is Walking Woman. Born of a French-Canadian trapper and snake woman, an Arapaho. she would be one of a new generation of children to straddle two cultures. And she would be one of the first children to receive a Euro-American education. Later, she would marry Fitzpatrick, and they would move to West Point, where they were very active on the Santa Fe Trail until his death. So you get a view of a lot of really interesting women on the trail to look at, to talk about, to think about. Now I bring you to our last woman of the evening, and my personal favorite is Marion Sloan Russell. Her memoirs entitled Land of Enchantment has given New Mexico its nickname. And her memoirs tell a fascinating account. It is considered by many, including myself, to be one of the finest trail accounts. Now, Earl Van Dyke said it was the finest account by a woman. I think it's the finest account by woman or man of the trail experience. She had a lyrical style, and she absolutely told a song in prose. As a little girl, she traveled the trail 5 times. And as a little girl, she was called Little Maid Marion by the traders and soldiers that she traveled with. And she would travel the trail and would finally settle down as an adult within sight of its deeply rutted landscape. Marion would die in 1936 in Trinidad, Colorado at the age of 92. And of all she'd been through, she was struck down by a car. So join me for this enchanting storyteller, Marion Sloan Russell. My beloved New Mexico. It was a land of enchantment where gods walked in the cool of the evening. Its hypnotic spell has been woven in a rich tapestry through my life. But every journey begins with a single step. Or in my case, at the age of 7, along with my resourceful mother Eliza and my older brother Will, we would climb up to a spring seat on a covered wagon bound for Santa Fe. This caravan was led by Colonel Xavier Aubrey. This energetic young man with piercing eyes was an ardent admirer of my mother and made sure that we felt secure and well provided for. I never knew my father, William Sloan. He was an Army surgeon in the Mexican-American War. But my mother would remarry again. This time, a man by the name of Jeremiah. Jeremiah Mahoney, to be exact. But he died when I was 7. And by 1852, we were but a family of 3, bound for Santa Fe on the Will-o'-the-Wisp Trail by the same name. I can only describe it as a magical experience where I would encounter places much like a tapestry, woven with lavender, red and yellow wildflowers, mingling with silvery green prairie grass. And the stories told of the hidden mysteries of the trail are sure to ignite our childish imaginations. Colonel Aubrey, while sitting at our fireside one night, told us of the New Mexico territory where only the brave or the criminal come. It was referred to as a land without law, but its air makes the blood run red and the heart to beat high and eyes to look forward. People came to live, and they got what they came for. Constructed barely a year before our arrival, Fort Union was laid out before us against a snowy backdrop. Uncle Sam was trying hard to protect his traveling public. After the mules were rested, we struck out for Santa Fe. Our sights originally set on California. We were forced to settle in Albuquerque after my mother's work basket with our money and family jewels were stolen. Tears rolled down her porcelain face when the jewels we were able to recover had to be sold in order to rent an adobe house, where she opened Sloan's boarding house. Most of our boarders were Indian scouts. Outfitted with begged and borrowed furniture, we were now in business, and California was but a dream. But it was after intruders breached our little sanctuary that my mother thought it best that we go back to Santa Fe, where we set up headquarters, taking in military boarders at the princely rate of $45 a month. It happened one night as I was winding my way home from the academy where I attended school that a man met me. We exchanged a few shy, simple words. But I would honor my acquaintance with this man more than any other, for he was Colonel Kit Carson. Great men such as Carson surpass others because they refuse to falter, regardless their frailties. In the end, Colonel Carson would be my very dear lifelong friend. And I would always be his little maid Marion. I would always be his little maid Marion. Alas, we had to return to Missouri when my mother found her home there was standing unrented. We left not realizing how homesick we would be for New Mexico before we would return. But in 1860, my mother pushed her chair back from the table after hearing Will and I whining for New Mexico. Keep still. I'm as homesick as you are. We're going west. Fort Union had grown in our absence, but we slipped back into the life easily. One happy year passed in Santa Fe before my mother's nomadic nature again took hold. But who am I to talk? I would rather embark in a prairie schooner for parts unknown than to embark on white wings to a place in skies called heaven. Back in Kansas City, a young man gave me a diamond ring. I like the feel of it on my finger. Then one day my mother said, you know, I think after the wedding I'm going west again. Go west without me? Such nonsense. The lure of the trail was too strong. I gave the ring back. It was at Old Fort Union in 1864 that I first met Lieutenant Richard D. Russell. I was rounding a corner rather suddenly. My green veil streaming behind me, the wind blowing the hair in my eyes, and I was struggling to keep my skirts where they belonged. Then suddenly he stood before me. And that was the moment the whole world stood still. My tall young lieutenant smiled at me as I struggled with my skirts, my hair, my veil. Then on he marched with his company, taking my ignorant young heart right along with him. They say love is like meteors, you only take it once. Cupid spins no second arrow on us. And I'm sure in my case that is true. From that first August day on the streets of Old Fort Union to that other August day 23 years later, when an assassin's bullet took him from me, my love never faltered. Indeed, that love is a living part of the soul of me today, even though the grass has waved over my lieutenant all these many years. After Richard mustered out of the Army, we, along with a partner, invested in a trading post in Tucalodi, New Mexico. After the partnership failed, and in spite of a long fight to hold on, we were forced to sell. And I would find myself leaving my beloved New Mexico. Near Trinidad, Colorado, we took over the management of the Stonewall Valley Ranch. We would be blessed with 9 children, 6 of whom are still living. Time passed, the children grew, and we had a rich and full life until Richard's untimely death in the dispute over the Maxwell land grant deal. All these many years later, my heart has returned to the old trail and the land it once ran through. Old paths beckon to me. I long to feel the warm desert sunshine on my face, my hands, my breast. The inner chamber of my heart is open wide, the pearls of memory just inside. I still stand, listening for the sound of wheels that never come. Stand waiting for the clasp of arms long crumbled into dust. But oh, how I long to travel that old trail as it once was. Just one more time. I leave you with this final thought. At the end of the day, the Santa Fe Trail is but a piece of real estate, colorful though it may be. It is the human stories that bring the trail to life and keep it alive today. Thank you. About any of these women or what their lives were like? Well, it's very interesting. Each of these women, Dona Tulas' book is just Dona Tulas by Mary Straw Cook. Then you have Susan Shelby Magoffin's diary. And then Marion Sloan's book is Land of Enchantment, where New Mexico got its nickname. And they're all, well, Dona's book isn't quite, the problem with Dona is a lot of her facts can't be confirmed, or they know exactly what she was doing. You know, there's a lot about her personal life you would like to know, but it isn't covered. But anyway, the other two for sure are very fascinating reads and give you a lot of insight into the trail, the history of the time, what was going on in the country at the time. And as I said, Marion Sloan Russell is just an enchanting storyteller. And you would think the way she grew up that where would she get that? Well, her mother saw to it that she was very well educated, as much as she could under her limited means. Whenever they were in town, she used to send her to a Catholic academy or school. And so she came away being fairly well educated and with her own personal storytelling skills. And she put these memoirs together later in life, and she recited some of them to a daughter who was a teacher. And I just find, I've read it 2 or 3 times. So, thank you. You were a great audience. Hope you enjoy. Good night.
Boy, what a perfect ending for our theme for taking the Smoky Hill Trail to Santa Fe, bringing these rich characters to life, Marla. We just really deeply appreciate this program and so many others that you do for us and inspire us so much. So on behalf of the Fort Wallace Memorial Association, I'd like to thank you so much, and thanks for blessing us.
Yes, thank you.
And then I'd like to hand this over to Mr. D.K. Clark.
I'm working on a book for the museum called Dragon's Tale. It's a children's book.
And in March, we were enchanted on Who Done It.
Yes, yes.
And
He's always
so-
talking about my best green outfit. With
So
the fuzzy
this
one.
also has the Dennis K. Clark Lecture Series poem for inspiring us and sustaining things that we don't think about, such
Right.
as the Aspensaurus, but the melodrama and the characters. So this is the first lecture series poem that's been awarded by somebody other than one of us. So, anyway.
Well, I'm very pleased, and I'm thrilled because it's you and other people who received it before me, and I came through it by a little different route. I was a teacher, and I love drama and history, and I tried to combine the two, and then use my teaching skills to spread the good word to kids, to adults, to everybody along the way. So I always say I love to teach, inspire, and motivate, and entertain. So I hope I was able to do that for you folks tonight, and I'm so pleased to be a part of this good company, and it means a lot.
And if you were here last March, don't be in here after dark.
Ah, yes. Oh, yes.